Hi everyone, my name is Alex and this is Tank Tested. Today we're doing a live stream called Aquariums with Strangers and I have a guest with me. He's a friend of mine, his name is Victor, you can see him on screen now. Victor and I met when we were on a trip with Project Piaba in the Amazon, and I thought he was such a knowledgeable guy, I wanted to have him on his stream. So with that, Victor, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and when you first got into the aquarium hobby?
Yeah, well, I have got into the aquarium hobby because of my mom. She was a person who was really interested in nature, and when I was about 4 or 5 years old, apparently they gave me a fish tank for Christmas, and that's where it all started. And at that time, you could go out to the ditch in front of our house and collect rainwater and put that in your tank, and that's how things kind of got started. And so I've been keeping fish for 50 years, if not more. And the other thing that really helped in my neighborhood, there was two fellows that had beautiful basement fish rooms, and I could take my allowance money and go and buy fish basically from the person that raised them. So having those two people and a parent that was really supportive, and both my mom and dad were, but my mom in particular, that's what got me hooked, I guess. That and the
Cool.
fact I'm born in March, so I'm a Pisces.
So both Katie and Tara are in the chat. They were also on our trip with Project Piaba, so they're saying hello.
Hey.
So I want to show everyone a quick little pan around your fish room. Obviously, I wish that I could go out and visit you in person. Can't right now. So
The invitation is there.
yeah, we'll start with this. So this is a video that Victor shot of his fish room. And as we pan around, Victor, can you tell me a little bit about what your fish room is and about how big it is?
Yeah, it's not very big. It's about 8 feet by 10 feet total. It has 3 shelf areas. It has a lower shelf, which is kind of a smallish kind of tanks, 15, 10-gallon tanks. Then it has a middle sort of shelf, which is the main shelf. All of those tanks are 2 feet high and are primarily 50 gallons up to a 75-gallon. And then it has an upper shelf that of very small tanks, like 1 to 3-gallon tanks, that I raise the fry in, and then I move them to the lower decks. And when they get to about 1 inch to 2 inches in size, I trade them with other hobbyists or sell them to other hobbyists. And those 2 tanks that you're looking at right now, those 2 particular ones are a shrimp experiment. But I like to point out those funny looking plants in the corner. They're from my great grandmother. Those plants are probably at least 80 years old. They've been
Wow,
growing in the same pot for 80 years. They like being in the fish room, So
that's awesome. So right now we're looking at your Amazon tank, which we'll get to in a second.
yeah.
So what are we looking at as we pan around the room? What kind of fish do you typically keep?
Well, I kind of have the fish room split up in half. So the on the video here, what you're seeing is on the right side, those are all my kind of hard water fish, because I keep a number of African rift lake fish. And then the left-hand side is primarily fish that like softer water. I have a community of African river fish, some Asian, river fish, some and creek fish, and then of course the fish from South America, which are in the 75. And so that's what the way it works out. When I do my water changes, I can kind of keep it straight. One day I'll do the water changes on the soft water side of things, and then the other day I'll do the water changes on the hard water side of things, because I live in an area where the water is very soft. It's almost like RO water coming out of the tap. It hardly has any minerals at all. You can sort of see as you pan around there's a couple of things that were kind of glowing there. That's where I raise baby brine shrimp. But they're always on the go because I always seem to have some fry. In fact, right now, I think partially because we're in social isolation where I am as well. I think the fish have been getting a lot more attention. I got 10 different species that are spawning right now.
Yeah, and that's kind of actually why I wanted to bring you on here is you are far better than I am at spawning fish, and I wanted to hear a little bit about how you go about inspiring the fish to reproduce. So, over the years, like, what was your first fish tank that you got fish to spawn in?
I think maybe the first fish that I actually got to spawn, like and do it intention. Well, it was an accident actually. Was Corydorus. I did a
Really?
water change one day, and all of a sudden, these skunk Corydorus that I had started spawning on the glass, and I went, "What's that all about?" And I was early teens at that particular time. That's the only one, and probably I had some unintentional spawning of some live bearers, but that's almost like you close your eyes and they're hatching babies or something.
Yeah. So for everyone at home, Cloud 9.5 commented you've got lots of nano tanks, and I think that's true. But in that video that we saw, I think actually a lot of those tanks that we're looking at are a lot bigger than you think they are. It's just you've got a lot of 30 to 50 gallon tanks that are jammed nice and close, and often
Yeah,
on the short end rather than the
yeah,
long end.
yeah, yeah.
But you do have some nano tanks too, as you
Yeah,
mentioned.
absolutely, but I don't run them basically as nano tanks, except those 2 tanks at the beginning of the video, those are like 1-gallon tanks, and, that's I was given a whole bunch of, cherry shrimp and just recently crystal red shrimp. Never really kept shrimp before, I think they're really quite pretty. I thought, "Oh, I'll put them in there and see if they'll do anything." The cherry shrimp have done extremely well, and I really don't do anything with them. The crystal reds are a little bit more difficult, but, there's something that I have in there, and the next thing I'm gonna try is I'm gonna try and put the shrimp in with some very small African cichlid fry that are in harder water, just to see if they can do some cleanup inside. I have refugiums in a lot of the tanks, just to
And what is a
hold.
refugium?
I like those are like small containers, like small containers that are actually in the tank that I can isolate a fish in, or put some very very small fish in. And I watch them until they get to about, let's say, about a quarter of an inch, and I know that they're probably going to do pretty well. And then I'll put them up into those smaller tanks that are on the upper shelf, and that's the way it works. Part of the fish room is that it's kind of serendipitous. We were doing some house renovations, and that room that you're looking at right now was going to be a garden storage area. And when the fellows were doing the work of our addition, uh, this area is actually underneath our kitchen. And I looked at the space, and it was going to be like 4 feet, and I'm over 6 feet tall. So I said to the guys, I said, "Hey, how deep can you make this?" As it turns out, they could make it about 3 inches taller than I am. So it has a very low ceiling. It has LED lights in the general lights in the room and stuff like that. And then we were able to pour a cement floor and tie it into the main drain for the house drain. So when I do my water changes, I just pour the water out onto the floor. It's all sloped down to the drain,
That's
and
nice.
yeah, and
That makes water
it's funny.
changes a lot easier.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing is that we had an old laundry sink because we were redoing our laundry room at the same time. The guys were going to throw out the laundry sink, and I said, "What are you going to do that for?" "Well, we want to give you a really nice sink in the fish room," they said, and I said, "Well, the fish aren't going to know any different. As long as it's not cracked, we'll use that." So that's what we did. We used an old laundry sink that was coming out of the house reno, and that's the same thing with all the shelving. We did
Mhm.
a deck upgrade, and all that material. I have a friend that's an architect, and we designed shelving to make sure that it was going to be really sturdy. And all the shelving material that I built all my shelves out of was extra wood that we had left over with regards to a deck rebuild that we were doing at the same time.
Cool. Well, I want to start off with a fish tank that we both have in common,
Yeah,
and those are cribs. We talked about this
yeah,
a few days ago when we chatted. So I want to show this video that you have on your Vimeo channel. And before we move forward, what is your Vimeo channel?
I think it's called Vic's Fish Room or
I
something
think
like
it's
that.
called Vic's Fish Room too. I'll leave a link in the description of this video
Yeah,
once the
yeah,
stream is
there's a
over so that
showcase in
people
there.
can see
Yeah,
it. So you just post videos of your various fish that are in the process of breeding and status
yeah,
updates on your fish room there.
yeah. And
So
usually I do that for the local club because
right,
people are saying, "What's going on in the fish room right now, Vic? Can you tell me a little bit more about how to raise these?" And the best way to do that is to create these. I call them 30 seconds in Vic's Fish Room or 1 minute in Vic's Fish Room, kind of thing. That's
yeah.
it.
So right now we've got some rainbow cribs on screen. Can you tell me a little bit about them and for everyone at home, um, what the process is to get them to breed? And before you do that, I just want to say hello to everyone that's joined, Danny's Aquarium, JC Aqua, everyone that's stopped by. So Vic, tell me a little bit about the cribs.
Well, this is one tank. I had this tank built. It's an acrylic tank, and it's a cube acrylic tank. It's about 40 gallons to 45 gallons in volume, and I set it up to be a community of African river fish. So the cribs, and I have Congo Tetras in there as well. The cribs kind of look after the bottom of the tank. There are two pairs of cribs in there right now. We've got the sort of the prime real estate in this tank is the front, and I've got a pair that have decided to have their spawn at the front, which made it really easy for me to take the video because everybody's out front.
Mhm.
Um, and I was a bit concerned that they weren't spawning because the females have this, as you can see, this beautiful reddish purple belly, and they were really colored up. And I thought, well, why aren't I seeing any fry? Well, they've if you look to the left there, there's a piece of I don't have a lot of plastic materials, but sometimes I use them as an architectural feature to hold the rocks up so that the rocks don't go slipping all over the place. Well, that female has built a small cave underneath that piece of plastic wood on the left. And for them, I think it's all about feeling comfortable, having good cover, and also doing good water changes so that the water parameters are there. And that's Dad, who just slipped into the video there. And you can see she looks like she disappeared. Well, I looked really closely the other day, and she actually has a cave underneath the plastic wood. So that's what she has. Uh, and then they're pretty good at looking after the fry, and they don't harass the Congo tetras. The one thing that they do is that the pair that's in the back of that particular tank, they have these dueling battles back and forth of who's got the prime real estate back and forth. So
Right. Yeah, I have some myself. That I actually was given to me by a friend in the local club, Gazenfar. And they also bred when they were in a different tank. I had an old 60 gallon. And it was a similar system where there was a little cave structure that they felt comfortable in. And it was actually a piece of driftwood that had a hole in it. And they would swim through that hole. And then they set up their brood site back behind the driftwood. So they weren't actually in a cave, but I think it felt enough like a cave that they felt comfortable and
yeah,
they were willing to breed. And they spawned maybe 3 or 4 times before I broke down in that tank. And now they're in my 150. They're the only fish that I just like wasn't willing to get rid of. It's not quite true. There's one other fish that I will get to in a second. Um, but they have not bred since they've been in this tank. And I think it's because there's not a whole lot of cover. Even though there's nothing predating on them, they just still feel a little bit uncomfortable actually breeding.
yeah,
So
yeah. In that particular video, that little part right there, you just saw that the female kind of went back, and sort of between that crack. That's because she's sparring with the female that's in the other pair. So they were kind of protecting that area with the fry. This video was taken, I think, about a couple of weeks ago when you mentioned that you really like cribs. I thought, oh well, I'll take this picture for Alex, so they can see. And they've been really good at looking after. They usually have a spawn of, I think, 15 to 20, something like that. And that's about how many fry are in there right now, or young juveniles are in there right now. They're about 2 or 3 weeks older now, and a couple of them are already showing that they're going to be males or females. They're starting to
Mhm.
be early sexable. It's pretty tough. There she is again, making sure that those two in the back, the neighbors are not chasing her young ones.
Yeah. So the next fish that I want to show off, and if anyone has any questions, I mean, Vic is pretty knowledgeable. I think he's a great insight. So if you want any feedback from him, feel free to leave questions, and we'll get to them. The next tank that I want to touch on is a video of a couple of bristle noses. So I'll
Oh
show
yeah.
that off now. There you go. So you can see these are two male bristle noses, and you want to tell me what's going on there?
Yeah, well, this is one of my tanks. It's actually a tank that's at my mom's house. I helped my mom set up a tank because she was the one that got me started in this, and I put in a whole bunch of caves for bristlenose, and that has been one thing that wasn't in the hobby when I would have started in the hobby, but in the last I want to say probably 10 years, maybe longer. First of all, you never saw bristlenose catfish when I was first in the hobby. You would have gotten standard Plecostomus, but nothing, sort of that only grows to maybe 4 inches to 5 inches. And I look after my mom's tank. I see her every week. And these guys have done extremely well. Her albino Plecostomus, I started off with a pair. I think that, you know, um, I've sold to the local pet store and to other hobbyists a couple hundred, $300-400 worth of bristlenose albino catfish. And from time to time, they will decide that that's the cave they want. I have no way of understanding what they are. And you can see that particular cave is hexagonal. At first, I didn't know where those came from, but I was down at the Greater Seattle auction this past year in November 2019, and a whole box of those were being sold. And then I figured out what they are. They are plant plugs. So they have sort of a tapered end to them, and you put them
Mhm.
into your house plants, and they slowly seep water out, and they make pretty good bristlenose caves. I still prefer either the rectangular or the round caves, and as it turns out, there's a local supplier of those, but they seem to be okay with these hexagonal caves as well. And those two males obviously have made the decision that somebody wants that cave, and I guess it's kind of like bull elk or whatever. Whoever pushes the other one out of the way, finally gives up. But I think that those two males were fighting over that cave for at least 10-15 minutes. And every once in a while, the little Corydorus would kind of come in and sort of check out what was going on. And you can see that every once in a while as well, there's a few Plecostomus fry in that particular tank. It's my mom's tank. She likes to have lots of things in there, and she's got lots of Plecostomus, lots of Edler guppies, and lots of platies in there. She likes lots of things. She's a collector.
Yeah. So can you describe why they want that cave, the mating
Yeah.
behavior of the bristlenoses?
Yeah, and I think it was probably first of all with the bristlenose, I've really become enamored with fish that don't eat their fry or don't eat a lot of their fry. And so what they need that cave for is that the males will go into the cave, the female go into the cave, they'll fertilize the egg in the cave, and the male has like spikes and spines on them, not those bristles on their snouts, but they have on their operculum, they have some spines and things, and they just kind of jam themselves in the cave, and the eggs stay pretty protected until the fry go through the whole process of hatching and come out, and they look like, basically, when they start free swimming, they look like miniature albino plecostomus. And so that's what these two males are doing. They want to find a breeding cave, even though there's about 6 or 7 breeding caves in this same tank, and it's only a 30-gallon tank. These two have decided this is the one they want.
Yeah, that's the best one.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess maybe hexagons are in this year. I don't know.
So when we were down in the Amazon, did you get the chance to see any plecos in the wild?
Yeah, I mean, we saw some really big, standard plecos that would never be proper for like a 30-gallon tank, which is what this is. Yes, we saw some beautiful fish, different species that I had never seen before, but they were like big. I think a couple of them were a good, 18 inches almost from snout to the end of their tail. And they seem to be around. The other types of plecos, the smaller ones, there were a few found, but I never saw them. I just saw ones that other people had found. The big ones, though, were pretty easy to see, and in the different streams and things that we saw. And we did, as you remember, we did that beach seine. We pulled up a really beautiful one in the beach seine, and once again, they had those real big spines, not only on their operculum, but also on their pectoral fins. And we were told when we were in Amazonia that if they had these big long spines on their pectoral fins, that was an indication that they were males.
Hmm. So I want to transition to the other tank that I think is kind of in the Amazon Rio Negro theme.
Mm-hmm.
And that's this tank, which I've converted a vertical video to work horizontally.
Yep.
But so this is this is a lot more of the tetras and things that you've kept.
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about that tank and how you've kept planted tank versus the cichlid tanks that are relatively bare?
Yeah, I've never kept a high-tech planted tank. I've only kept sort of low-tech tanks, so I don't do any carbon dioxide or any of that kind of thing. And but one thing I've carried over the 50 years or so that I've been keeping tropical fish, I have a lot of deep gravel filters and deep gravel filter beds. And I think that that's what's allowed the crypts actually to do really well. I think that the crypts have done really well because there's a thick layer of detritus and stuff in the gravel. And I think they've done really well in that particular situation. And then a lot of um, Anubias nano in there. There's some other ones as well. I'm not particularly happy with the plant growth right now. I've been trying to figure out why it's not as vibrant as it possibly could be, because it's green, but it should be like a deep green. And I think that my major problem is, I've come down to the conclusion that my major problem is two things. Once again, our water here is very soft and almost has no minerals in it at all. So we quite often buffer our water in this particular area. And I think what had happened is that the small amount of crushed coral that I would put into the tank to help buffer the water and keep it 6.8 to 7 pH had eventually dissolved, because the water is slightly acidic coming out of the tap. And also, I think that the overall temperature in the fish room might be 3 to 4 degrees warmer than what those plants like.
Yeah, you mentioned that your fish room is around 80 degrees
Yeah,
Fahrenheit.
it's about 80, and then because of its location and because it's really well insulated, even though that there's a humidifying exhaust fan, so it's not humid, I think the plants actually do better in the winter when the overall fish room temperature might drop down to about 75 to 77. I think the plants actually do better. And so I think that that's part of the reason. But I have no way of of really controlling the temperature of the room. I'm actually looking at, is there a possibility of bringing some cold air? There's a deck right next door to the fish room. I'm looking at, in the summertime, bringing some colder air from underneath the deck into the fish room to provide, sort of moderate the temperature. The fish don't seem to mind too much at all. One of the little things that I picked up when I was in the Amazon was, I've always liked to keep angels with tetras, because it makes the tetras kind of school and kind of keep together. And so I have 4 young adults, I call them, in the tank of just sort of standard silver tetra angels, and I have them in there, and they seem to get along really well. One of the things it's done, which is interesting, is that there's a small group of Cardinal Tetras in there, and they're all hanging out in the crypts. They're not up swimming around with the rummy nose tetras, or the bloodfin tetras, or the black skirt tetras, which, by the way, I think black skirts are some of the fish that I've found as tetras seem to live the longest. I've had them for years, same fish.
Yeah, well, I mean, the same thing with neons. I mean, I know Rachel O'Leary has some neons that are more than a decade old.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a well-kept tetra can last a decade plus.
yeah, yeah. So that's what I have. And the other thing, all of my tanks are heavily filtered. And I've been trying probably more at the beginning of the hobby. I would have done this just as a standard thing, but I've been thinking about the substrate is also part of your whole filter system, and how to work with deep sand filters and plenums. So now I'm building plenums into any new tank that I build. I put a plenum into it.
And can you describe what a plenum is?
Yeah, basically a plenum is a space underneath the gravel where there's a little bit of water flow. It might be similar to when I was started in the hobby. Under gravel filters were a big thing.
Yeah, they were a
But
big thing when I started in the hobby too,
yeah,
25-ish years ago.
yeah, and the thing is, though, that they were pushing a lot of water, okay, through the gravel. A plenum pushes some water through the gravel, but very slowly. And so what happens is the water does flow through the gravel, but it flows through slowly, so it allows for some anoxic situation. Anoxic just means it's sort of the interface between aerobic and anaerobic. And there are
And
some.
can you describe all 3 of those terms for
Okay.
the folks at home?
So aerobic are bacteria or organisms like us that like to be in a fairly oxygenated situation. And people keeping tanks and things like that, the bubblers that we have in our tank, the airflow that we have in our tanks, that's all about agitating the surface, and that's where the oxygen comes in. And in fact, I learned that lesson in a very unique way. I was in a first or second year biology class, and I did an oral exam because I found oral exams quite interesting. And so the prof asked me, so where do the fish in this situation get their oxygen? And I proceeded to tell him about electrolysis and everything else. And he sort of said, yeah, but where's the electrolysis going on? And then I sort of thought, oh, wow, I don't really understand this. And I've been keeping fish for a long time. It's all about dissolved oxygen.
Right.
And because I've done a lot of teaching with young learners as well as adult learners, there's a very simple experiment that you can do with pH. And that is, if you get a little vial of water and a straw, and you put a few drops of pH indicator, and you blow into the water, the carbon dioxide will actually start to lower the pH in the water, because it'll be starting to form acids.
Right.
From
So carbonic acid
carbonic acid.
dissolves into the water column from your
That's
breath.
correct. Yep.
And it lowers the pH. Yeah.
Yep. So anyways, so aerobic stuff is stuff that's happening in the main water column. Okay.
So we've got aerobic, now anaerobic.
Now, now anaerobic is where there's no oxygen, it's divorce of oxygen, And so you get that in certain situations. You can see it on the seashore, for example, in very, very thin, in very, very small grain sand. When you dig up the black stuff, that's an anaerobic layer, okay?
Mhm.
Because no oxygen is really getting down there. You can get it, and it usually gives off like a sulfur kind of smell, then because it's often sulfur dioxide that's being released. Well, anoxic bacteria are ones that live in the interface between those two things. And their importance in the aquarium is that they're the ones that actually take the nitrites, the nitrates that are naturally formed through
Mhm.
the aerobic process and break them down um, to nitrogen gas. And that's what you want to have happen. So I'm trying always to limit the amount of nitrates that are in my water, because most fish are living in water where the water is moving to a certain extent. I think that was the other big takeaway from the Amazonian trip, was that water's moving all the time. And the fish are really never sitting in a pool of water. Now, that might be different from some of the labyrinth fishes like bettas and gouramis and things like that. But for the fish that I typically keep, they need to have water moving. And the water moving in a natural situation is like a flow through filter situation. It's like they're living in their own sump, I guess. I don't know, something like that.
Right. That's interesting. So basically, I think that that's something that we overlook, is that we're just focused on anaerobic bacteria and trying to stop that from forming in the
Yes.
bottom of our
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah.
But you're saying that one of the fail points of like an under gravel system is that the flow is actually so high that you don't get that intermediate zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the plenums that I build, I take some kind of inert type of filter medium, like the little black plastic bio balls,
Mhm.
and I lay them down on the bottom. That's the bottom layer. And then over top of them, what I do is there's a type of crafting material that's used for crocheting or needlepoint. They're
Yeah.
plastic sheets. They have, I want to
It's a plastic sheet with a grid pattern.
right,
Yeah.
right. It's very inert, and I put that down, and then I put a layer of gravel down, and then I will put a layer of higher iron-based substrate down. I don't know if this is true, but what the videos that I've watched and the reading that I've done is these anoxic bacteria are attracted to iron. And so to kind of get them started, having a layer of fluorite or some other kind of more iron rich substrate is what I put down. And then I put down the regular aquarium gravel over top of that, and I top it with whatever I want. Now, that's a great system in a tank that you don't have diggers in. And because I keep a
Sure.
lot of cichlids, um, I'm trying to think about how that can happen in another way. And so typically that sort of anoxic bacteria I try to encourage in canister filters. And I've been working on an idea of how I could do it in a tank that's full of diggers. And you could definitely do it if your cichlid tanks had a sump, because of course that's not where the diggers are. And the other thing that I've been doing more recently is building foam corner foam filters, a lot based on the design from Swiss Tropicals, which I think is great.
Mhm.
And I build those into a lot of tanks. I'm building foam filters into a lot of tanks. Now that 75-gallon tank that's in the video right now doesn't have one of those in it. But just to give you an idea, that's a 75-gallon tank. It has 2 canister filters that, when they're running at peak efficiency, are pumping about 300 gallons per hour. It also has an AquaClear 110, so that's another about 100 gallons per hour. And it has a sponge filter in it as well, in a corner that you just can't see because of
A
the
lot of filtration.
yeah,
That's a lot of filtration.
yeah, yeah. Now, I also run on the idea that at no point are your filters running at 100% efficiency.
Yes, I think no matter what a filter's marketed as, it's
Yeah,
pumping way slower than
yeah,
anything they claim.
yeah. My
That's
understanding.
basically So just like a background on that, how they measure the flow of a pump of a canister filter is based on the canister filter being generally at the same height as the aquarium,
Yeah.
which allows for way more flow. But none of us keep canister filters at the same height as our aquarium. We keep our canisters underneath the aquarium for the most part.
Yeah.
And as a result, the pump has to work way harder. So even when the filter is completely clean and it's not fighting any of the buildup of bacteria and detritus, it's still not pumping at what it's advertised at.
Yeah.
So you really do have to over pump, or you have to overbuy relative to what you're trying to get, or add additional forms of filtration.
Yeah. Now, in that particular tank, I don't have any sort of power heads for flow, but I do have, the AquaClear providing flow plus the outlet pipes of the two, the marine land canister filters that I have that are on that particular tank. So there's a lot of water agitation. If I was to improve that tank, the only thing that I might add would be some kind of like a power flow or a power head that would push the water in a direction. But you can see there's a lot of surface agitation there and things. That's one of the beauties of course, the sponge filter that's in the corner. You're always going to get that additional factor of having lots of aerobic action at the top and a lot of dissolved oxygen or dissolved air, which has oxygen. Yeah.
Yeah. So Katie has a question for you.
Okay.
Do your angelfish have names?
Do my angelfish have names?
Yeah. Do any of your fish have names, actually?
Well, I think I have about 1,000 fish in the fish room, and my standing joke is that's number 1, that's number 2, that's number 3. So my answer to that question is no, they don't have names, but they do have personalities, and but they don't have any names. No.
Before I move on, yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, that's why you're like hero fish, your centerpiece fish. Maybe they get names, but it sounds like no.
Yeah.
So Tara asked, "What has your experience been with sumps?" And then I want to move on to another tank.
Yeah, I think sumps are absolutely I think they're a fantastic system because they are huge filter, right? They've got a huge filter. The problem in my tiny fish room is it's either have a sump or have a fish tank that has fish in it, and the fish went out, kind of thing. Because I would have to remove the bottom shelf, for example, to have sumps to run all the tanks on the top shelf, and so or the middle shelf. So no, I haven't run that, but I think sumps have a huge number of advantages. In particular, it's the surface area and how many different types of media that you can use and all those kinds of things.
Cool. All right, so we're going to transition to another tank. I'll let you introduce what we're looking at.
Yeah, well, this is sort of if I was to have a happy spot about my tanks right now, this would be one of them. This is a species of Tanganyika cichlid. These are Neolamprologus burchardi. I love these fish. They kind of look like, I don't know, like some other African fish, a little bit like saltwater fish, but I have never been able to have fry from these fish. And my partner, my wife, was looking after the fish room while I was in Amazonia, and to my surprise, they came back and they had their first spawn. Now, these are some young adults that I got once again when I was in at the Seattle aquarium auction. And I love these fish because they're colony breeders. So you can see that there's a variety of sizes there. So once the colony gets into the habit of raising the fry, you can have several, ages of fry all at the same time. And that's only a 15-gallon tank. I don't know what I'm going to do when they start to get bigger, but that's only a 15-gallon tank.
So that's a big question that I've got for you as someone that has, what you said, 10 different species breeding right now?
Yeah.
obviously you can't keep them all. So what happens to them? Where do they go?
I Most of the time I help about 4 or 5 different schools with their tanks. So I will set up tanks at schools so that there are something in the classrooms for the young children that are in the classroom. So some of them will go there. There's a large enough hobby community in the area where I live to be able to trade back and forth, and so different people sort of specialize in things. More recently, I've gotten very interested. It started with the Plecostomus, but now has moved to some of these African cichlids, especially the Tanganyikan ones. The colony breeders like this that have various age groups of fry and young juveniles with the parents. I'm sure that some of them must get eaten, but as you can see, there must be, I don't know. I don't even want to count how many fish that are in there. Um, but that's what happens to them. And then there are some we have a few local fish stores. We don't have very many anymore. Most of them
Mhm.
are the big box stores, but we do have a few. And there are some that will take the fish on trade or something like that.
So this is the last species in this lineup that we're going to go through that I have any experience with. These were actually the first fish that the first cichlids that I kept. I kept a few smaller fish when I was, a little kid, live bearers. But my brother got out of the hobby, 25-ish years ago, and he gave me his cichlid tank. So I have, traumatic memories of these fish because I was just not ready to keep cichlids. Um, so it was something that I've refused to go back to African cichlids no matter what. I won't do it, and I don't imagine that'll change anytime soon because I'm trying to not have too many tanks in my life. But their breeding behavior is really lovely, and it's fun to see their territorial behaviors and how you can keep a dense tank running.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about what the ideal population for a tank setup is?
I kind of like the fish determine that, to tell you the truth. Now, that particular tank, okay, it's a 15-gallon tank. It has an Aqua Clear 70 on it, plus like an extra large sponge filter.
Hmm.
So that's way more than what you would normally have. And that's one reason why, the bioload is not over the top. The only other thing that I have in that tank is an albino, two albino bristlenose plecos, and they just sort of are the algae control individuals in the tank. Um, and there's obviously some rock work. There's some small pots in there. One of the big things with African cichlids, which has been a huge improvement in the hobby, I want to say in the last 20 some years, is that you can buy really good substrate for them. Because the
Hmm.
substrate, now you have, crushed corals and things like that that are really mineral based. And in our area, that's really important because I'll go back to the fact that we have this very soft, almost like RO water out of the tap. So that's been a real boon for us. And so I kind of let the fish determine. Like I had no, I put these fish in there. I bought them in November. They were some nice young juveniles, almost, well, obviously a breeding size. And I put them in there and just sort of let them sort themselves out. Now, I'm going to have to obviously reduce the stock in that tank as the fries start to get up around, an inch to an inch and a half. And some of the ones that are in the tank, because that video was taken probably at the beginning of March, are getting up around that size. So yes, I'm going to have
Wow.
to do that. So that's one of the things that's going to happen. But one of the things about the cichlids, basically, I have the opposite from you with regards to having cichlids. Cichlids actually put me through university
Yeah, tell
because,
me about that.
yeah, well, because you see, um, I was raising fish as a university student, and I sold some fish, but not a lot. But it was my fish keeping ability that allowed me to get jobs in labs And that's what put me through university. So I was looking after big fish behavior ethology labs with multiple tanks and flow through filter systems. And then there would be some interesting behavior going on, and I would write papers on the behaviors that I saw. And I became fascinated at that time with regards to coevolution, like what cichlids do, for example, in South America compared to what cichlids do in Africa, what tetras do in one place as opposed to another, and questions of like coevolution and how different species and different groups actually do similar things, even though they're not genetically related. They're quite distantly related from one another, and how they, fill in different ecological niches that they might live in. So my experience with cichlids, even though my first cichlid that I ever had destroyed my tank, I went down to as I was saying, I had these two guys in my neighborhood who had these aquarium, rooms, which was their basements, which are fantastic. And I bought my first cichlid from this one fellow, and it was a convict cichlid. I didn't know what fish it was. It just looked nice. It had these big black bars on it. It wiped out every fish in my tank. I didn't know what the heck was going on. In fact, my mom called the guy up and scolded him for selling such a nasty fish to this young kid. Anyway, so that was my first experience with cichlids. But I think it's their behavior. I think it's the fact that they seem to notice you. I mean, the
Mhm.
tetras will come up to the top and they'll feed, but the angels come right up to the front glass and kind of going, okay, I'm making the connection between that shadow on the outside and the food. And if I get up there first, none of these tetras are getting any of that food.
Um, Robert S says great college story. I think so.
Yeah.
What happened to the convict once you realized that it was the culprit?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I had two fellows in my neighborhood who basically had basement fish rooms. Fantastic. For a young hobbyist that was really interested in it, yeah, I would just go down. There was like going to, you know, my own private aquarium, kind of thing. And so the other guy said, "Oh, I'll take that fish." So we took that convict cichlid and we took it over to the other guys, and he put it into one of his tank with cichlids that were just the same size as his, and it was the most placid fish in the tank. So it was all about the small tank, and it should never have been sold to me. I mean, the fellow who sold it to me should have said, "And where are you going to be putting that fish?" Because I have a whole tank of convict cichlids right now, and they just do their own thing. I call it the convict kingdom, because there's about 20 or 30 fish in a tank, and they are raising fry at different times or whatever. And it's a great fish I have found in some of my school tanks, because they quite often will set up a territory. They quite often will raise their young, and you can teach so many things to kids about, you know, parental structure and animal behavior and even development. And for elementary schools, where I spent a lot of time teaching, they're great. They're great for that, and they're almost, I don't want to say this, but they're almost bomb proof in terms of water quality and things. But any tank that I help a school set up, I use the same filtering systems. I either get donations from other hobbyists or I have spare myself, and we set them up with like three different filter systems. And so as long as the class is willing to do weekly or bi-weekly water changes, they usually have very few problems with those fish.
Cool. So before we move on to the next cichlid, Tara says feel free to send her some of those babies once she moves. So yeah, I'm sure they'll all need homes. So I want to move on to this next tank, and we've now entered a realm of animals that I know nothing about. So tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about what we're looking at here.
Yeah, this is sort of, I've fallen in love with this particular fish, this particular tank. These are Tropheus, from originally from Lake Tanganyika. This is probably now I usually buy fish locally from other breeders. These fish all came from other breeders in my area. This is Tropheus duboisi. This is a fish that's almost, well, I only feed them vegetarian food. If you give them too high protein, I have not had success with them before. And these are all Tropheus duboisi. Now you can see that some of the fish look like they have little spots and stripes on them. Those particular fish are young. So those are
Hmm.
very young Tropheus duboisi. And they come out with these beautiful little starlight patterns on them. And the larger fish with the bluish head and the yellow bar through it, that is an adult Tropheus duboisi. And there's another fish that sometimes swims through the frame, and that's another species of Tropheus. That's a chimba. Tropheus, I think, morai chimba is just a group. And in Lake Tanganyika, there are northern Tropheus species and southern Tropheus species. And the duboisi, the ones with the yellow stripe in them, those ones are from the northern part of the lake, and the morai are more from the southern part of the lake, and they won't crossbreed because in the lakes like Lake Tanganyika, there you what we're trying to do is not have crossbreeding between the different species to try and keep the lines pure. And duboisi do not spawn with the Tropheus morai, so that's why they can be kept together in a colony. And their colony, they are very aggressive, and it's good to keep them in groups of 10 plus. And they've become a really big success story for me. I finally got the parameters right, and right now I think I have about 150 duboisi fry.
Wow.
Yeah, right now. So
Uh, Robert says Tropheus are not easy to keep.
no,
They look great.
it,
He also asks, what size tank is this that we're looking at?
that's I have two. For a while, Fluvel was putting out what they call their designer series. There were then they had they their names card started with V, and this is a uh, Venetia. This is a corner tank. This is a 90-gallon corner tank.
Okay.
And so once again, in terms of the filtration on this tank, you can't really see it. But because it's a corner tank, it really lends itself to having a corner matin filter.
Hmm.
And so there's a large corner matin filter. These tanks are like over 2 feet in height. And so there's a corner matin filter in that tank that goes 2 foot of foam. And then behind that, there are two jet lifters that are pulling the water out. And I've also put an anoxic filtration symptom basket in behind it, like an internal sump. So it does take up some space, but it's the corner, so you don't kind of really notice it very much.
Hmm.
And so that's why it's there. But this tank has a Fluvel FX6, a Fluvel 406, and the corner matin filter in on that tank. Plus,
A lot of
um,
filtration.
yeah, yeah. And my understanding is that in the wild, tropheus come from lake systems that have quite a lot of surface agitation, and that surface agitation provides a lot of oxygen. So that's one reason why I love the Eheim air stones. So I have those sort of ball type air stones in each corner. So I've got lots of airflow in that, lots of surface agitation and flow in that particular tank. And in that Tropheus tank and other Tropheus tanks that I have, I also have a power head pushing the water around to provide a current.
So, on how long did it take you to get this colony stable enough that they started reproducing for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It probably took me, I want to say it probably took me about 6 to 7 months before I got the parameters actually, just that this group of fish would spawn. So they they typically need a water pH around 8, something like that. They seem to do in our area okay like that, around 8. And the other thing is that I one thing that I have started to change in the last year. I used to not pre-buffer the water. I used to take the water and just buffer it when it was in the tank. Now the water that I put into these tanks, I buffer before I put it into the tank. Instead of letting the water come in that's almost like slightly acidic and very, very soft and put the chemicals in, now I put the chemicals in the water that I put into the tank. Um, when I actually put the water in the tank. So
Mhm.
that's something I'm doing differently with all of my African tanks in the last year. And I think that actually helps in particular with these harder to keep fish, at least for me, these harder to keep fish, the Tropheus. And once again, that's a connection that I have in Seattle. There's a wonderful person that I met in Seattle through the Seattle Aquarium Society Club, and he is an absolute expert on Tanganyikan fish. So he says jump, I jump, kind of thing. So
Sure.
those are some of the things that I've learned from him.
So I don't know if you know about this. I imagine you do because I feel like I know the type of things that you know about. Um, can you talk at all about the speciation of fish in the Rift Valley lake systems and how the different African cichlids? You mentioned two species that are in the same lake but won't
Yeah,
interbreed. Can you talk a little bit about the
yeah,
history of the cichlids?
yeah. Like for the Rift Lake cichlids, they're kind of like Darwin's finches. There was a group, in this case, a family of fishes that came into the Rift Lakes. I don't know the history of that, how many millions of years ago that actually happened, but they live in various parts of the lake, the deep parts of the lake, the shallow parts of the lake, these rocky areas at the shorelines of the lake. And there's a tremendous amount of speciation that's occurred. And they're all fairly closely related. Now, the fish of Lake Tanganyika, which is where these fish are from, have a whole bunch of interesting shapes. There's shapes, all different kinds of shapes and things, and they seem to have that seems to be a characteristic of the cichlids in Lake Tanganyika. If you go to Lake Victoria, the fish all seem generally the ones that come into the fish trade all seem to have some similar kind of shape, but they have these very interesting color patterns. And then the fish from Lake Malawi, where many fish come from, they can be, huge sexual dimorphism, like where the females are yellow and the males are dark blue with stripes. And they're as close, I think, in the freshwater world for natural fish, not ones that have been hybridized, of natural fish that are similar to coral reef fish. And if you think about it, they're living in these rock shoals and they're all fairly closely related. So how do you tell one species from another, kind of thing. So they have all of these different colorations and things. But
Right.
um,
Do you keep fish from all three lakes, or do you
yeah,
mainly?
I do.
So
I
you
do.
keep Victorian cichlids as well? Robert asked that question.
Yeah, I do. And that's another recent success story. I told you about the Brichardi, which is a Tanganyikan fish. Well, I have kept 3 or 4 species that are available locally within the tropical fish trade of Victorian cichlids. And one of them didn't look like it was very well. And it was one of the females. The females are usually more drab in color. Um, and so I thought, oh, well, I'll take it out and have a look at it. And I thought, well, is there a possibility that she's holding eggs in her mouth? Many of the African cichlids, by the way, the females will hold eggs in their mouth because they live in these very dense situations. The females will hold the eggs in the mouth until such time that the fry are free swimming, and then they'll spit the eggs out. There are some fantastic videos from the Rift Lakes, and you'll see the female has spit out these eggs, and then all of a sudden, like 100 fry will come back into her mouth again. She's kind of like protects them, when they're free swimming. Anyway, so I thought, maybe well, wouldn't you know it, this female is a type of Haplochromis. There's a lot of Haplochromis species in Lake Tanganyika. I can't tell you what species it is. Um, because many of them look really close in color, and I'm not an expert on Victorian
Mhm.
cichlids. She had 30 fry in her mouth. That's why she wasn't eating. And so I've collected those fries, so now I have some of those. And that's the other thing about these particular trophius that I find fascinating. I'm used to like Tanganyikan and also Malawi cichlids. Sorry, I should say, Malawi and Victorian cichlids. These cichlids, the trophius in particular, they can eat and hold eggs in their mouth at the same time. I have no idea how they do that. And the only reason that I know that that's the case is I saw a female, and they kind of, the lower part of their throat kind of becomes extended a bit. And so that's when you can tell that they're probably holding eggs or fry. So I thought, I'm going to take this Duboisi, one of my breeding Duboisi females, out, and I'm going to see if she has any eggs in her mouth. Well, she didn't have eggs in her mouth. She had fry that were at that time already at least a quarter of an inch in size, fully developed,
Wow.
and about 4 pellets of food at the same time. So she was eating while she had these babies in her mouth. I don't know any other cichlid that's capable of doing that, but definitely the Tropheus can do that.
Cool. Well, Dominic, another person that we met when we were down in Brazil, is in the chat and saying hello.
Hey,
Um,
Dominic. Well,
and Katie asked, do you supplement the diets when your fish are breeding?
no.
No?
No. I supplement the diets when the fish are, when the fish are young, when they're going through a really high growth period. But what I do with my fish is I try to buy really good quality food all the time. And I had the luxury, as I was going through university, of also working at the local aquarium. And I learned a lot about fish and fish husbandry from the aquarium. In fact, I was doing some work on nutrition for a type of fish in our area. And we were finding that they were developing these little lesions. And it was because the food was getting freezer burnt, and wasn't carrying the right amount of nutrients. So
Oh,
what we did with that food is we supplemented vitamins in with the food, and that made a big difference. So I'm really picky about what brands of food that I buy, and I mix it. I think that different formulas from different companies mix together. So I have, for example, for my adult, in this case, Tropheus cichlids, which are basically 100% vegetarian. I have 3 different types of vegetarian food that I mix together that they get, and from time to time, I'll also supplement with some raw, like spinach, for example,
right.
because they'll rip that up. Um, for my more carnivorous, higher sort of protein type fish, like the Victorian cichlids and the Malawi cichlids, I will give them another mixture that is higher that way. And recently, I found a type of flake fish food that's cold dried. So there's no heating process or limited heating process in the development of it, because once you add a heating process of things, there's more things that break down. And
Mhm.
so I've been adding that. But all my fish get dried food because it's easy to keep. The other thing I also learned from my aquarium, which is something I never did before, all of my bulk food I keep in a refrigerator. I don't I don't let it get
Really?
heated up at room temperature, because I think, it just keeps the food better. And I keep all of my, brine shrimp eggs, for example, I keep it in the refrigerator, and they're just as viable. Their viability continues to be really good by keeping it in the refrigerator. So I keep all of that stuff in the refrigerator. And if it's a sealed bag, it's never been opened before, I might even put it into in just the freezer of a refrigerator.
All right, so I'm going to transition to the last tank that we're going to see today, and then I'm going to go and ask a couple of questions before we
Sure.
talk about these. So the first question I've got for you is from Robert. Do you ship fry of your cichlids? Are you willing to ship fry?
Um, I I haven't ever shipped any fish. I'm just a personal hobbyist, kind of thing. So, in my area, it's a large enough area that in my local area, I do that. I don't do anything really on a commercial basis, and I kind of like to know where my babies are going, you know. And so if I'm working with other hobbyists, I kind of have a sense of that, and I'm kind of all about, as these Juliochromis ornatus are showing you, I'm kind of a colony kind of person. And so and I really like the meeting the people, and I've met lots of fantastic people that are either part of our local club or in the community. But yeah, I don't. I think I have a friend of mine that's thinking about opening a potential wholesale operation, and I'm really confident in the quality of fish that I have bought from him and where he takes that. So if I did anything, I would be selling to him, and then he would theoretically be distributing it from there.
Gotcha. So Robert has corrected me. So unfortunately, you guys can't see this, but my laptop screen doesn't work great. So it's very finicky. So I'm having trouble actually reading everything. I get a lot of lines through the text. And apparently, what Robert actually asked was, do you strip fry from the
Oh,
mother's mouth? But because I can't really read details on my screen, I interpreted it as ship.
okay, that's fine. That's fine. So that's a great question. My answer is yes and no. There is a group of hobbyists from New Zealand. They've got a great website. It's called Fish and the Number Two Water. They have beautiful fish. And I do believe, as they talk about, that putting the female into a refugium and letting her spit the babies out and then remove her actually will have stronger fry, because anything I think that goes wrong embryonically inside the mom's mouth, she just absorbs that. Uh, but if it's a type of fish that I really want to have, or is a little bit rare, I might strip them. Or if they're in a community tank that I know that as soon as she spits the fry out, they're instant food. There's been a couple of times when I've taken a female out of the tank and the fry are just about ready to come out of her mouth, and so she freaks out and she spits them out. I'll tell you, it's a feeding frenzy. It looks like a shark attack. Like, they really know that that's the case. Now, here's a new thing I just started about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. There was a person that was shutting down a tank. They gave me a whole bunch of crystal red shrimp, and there's these really interesting sort of shrimp habitats, and they're a little basically a little pyramid of these hexagonal ceramic uh, pieces. I've put them into my community African tanks, thinking that the holes in them might be small enough that some fry will be able to escape and stay in those honeycombs until such time that they can, survive in the main tank. It's just an experiment on my part, and But yeah, I'd like to sort of see if that actually works, because I have had some fry that are not colony breeders, like the Judeochromis ornatus that you have on the screen right now. These are colony breeders, so they don't eat their fry, so they're usually okay. And so what happens is that what I'm doing right now is I'm putting them in there a bit of as an experiment to see if I might have a few more fry that survive. I'll tell you, at the beginning when I was having my first Tropheus dubossi, and a female released some fry, very, very few fry. They don't have big spawns at all. And I saw them getting snapped up by every other fish in the tank. I didn't want that to happen. Now I'm not so worried about it because, like I said, I think I have somewhere around 100 dubossi fry right now. And this good friend of mine that lives in the Seattle area that looks after the Tropheus, he keeps active colonies, and they produce fry, and those colonies have been self-sustaining for quite a while now.
So I'm going to guide us back to shrimp in a second, because Sir Pranala has joined the chat and is very excited that you briefly talked about shrimp. So I want to circle back to that for a second. But on the premise of like keeping fry safe, I assume that like the marble method of having large marbles in the tank so that the fry can hide in that substrate doesn't work for the cichlids, because they'll grow too big and they'll still be eaten.
Yeah. There's lots of egg, scatterers that's the way you spawn them.
Right.
You put in, for some of the small eggs and stuff like that. Most of the cichlids that I have, the eggs are pretty big, there have been some early fish that I have stripped the eggs from the female, and those eggs are big. I mean, compared to like these fish that you have on the screen right now, they have tiny, tiny little eggs. But I only keep them, that's basically a species specific tank. And they keep them very well guarded. And so they're very, very small. But no, these are not egg scatterers. And I don't know, there's always an exception to the rule when it comes to fish. I don't know if there are any cichlids that I'm aware of that are egg scatterers.
Right.
They all seem to lay their eggs on surfaces or whatever. But I mean, I've raised angel fry as well, and those things are tiny, like really tiny. And but once again, they lay them on like a filter stem, or they lay them on, a leaf or something like that.
Yeah. So in addition to all the cichlids, and you've got some tetras and that type of thing, you also have, I think, 2 tanks with shrimp in them.
Yeah.
So
actually 3 now.
3. So you have very hard water fish. You have the cichlids. You have cichlids that require a pH of 8 to be happy, and then you're also keeping shrimp that require very soft water. Can you talk about how you're keeping those shrimp happy, and which tank is having the most work on the water being done?
Well, I start off with very, very soft water. So in some ways, even though you have to add chemicals, it's easier to add chemicals than trying to take the chemicals out. That's what I've always found. So with the shrimp, I have a TDS meter, and so that allows me to really pay close attention to what my TDS levels are. And it's pretty easy for me, like I said, with the shrimp, it's pretty easy for me to have a pH of 7 down to 6 without any really kind of problem. But the issues that I like, my cherry shrimp, I don't even really touch them. I just sort of let them do their thing, do a very small water change. Sometimes I'll do a little small water change, but they're in really tiny tanks, so it's really easy to do. And as it turns out, they're in tanks right next to the sink, so it's pretty easy to, with a sponge on the end to siphon the water out. And I have to say, I'm just learning about shrimp now.
Do
But
you
I
have
think,
colonies yet? Are they
oh, I
breeding yet?
definitely have a colony of cherry shrimp. I'm trying to work on. I have 4 different species or 4 different variants of shrimp right now. I got given a really high quality. I didn't know they were high quality until I looked them up, of crystal reds. Um, so I've got some crystal reds, and I have this what's called a white orchard or something like that. And I think that there's going to be something with regards to the softer water fry and keeping them with shrimp. I think that there might be some possibilities there.
Hmm.
Um, and working together with them. But I get in some of my tanks that I don't have plecos in. Sometimes I'll get algae, like hair algae, and they'll almost be like a moss ball, and I'll just put it into the cherry red shrimp thing, and it's like this horde comes out of the of the other plants and things that are in that tank. It's pretty interesting, that's for sure. But I've the the shrimp started to become more prevalent around here about 6, 7 years ago, I want to say, uh, and uh, and they're very pretty. There's no question, and there's a real talent to keeping them. Um, but they don't have personalities the same way cichlids do.
No, they don't really do that.
I don't want to
Um,
offend anybody, but they don't.
no, they kind of all act exactly the same.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's funny how I think no matter where you are in the continent, because you're in Canada, you're not in the United States, um, that the specific thing that sweeps across an area lasts for a few years. Everyone gets that thing because they're trading it back and forth between clubs, and then it becomes wildly out of fashion because something else has moved in, and everyone's already done the thing. So at some point, everyone will have had cherry shrimp, and then it'll be impossible to get rid of them. You'll have to just give them away.
Yeah, they
Um,
weren't that way when they first came in, that's for sure.
yeah. So right now we're looking at a tank, and we haven't talked about it yet. Can you tell me a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Yeah, this is the first group of Judeochromis ornatus that I started, and this is when I really started to fall in love with Tanganyikan colonies. These on a local fish forum, a fellow was saying, "Look, I've got these Judeochromis ornatus, and they're bugging my Tropheus. Would anybody be interested?" So I sent an email to the guy, and he said, "Come and pick them up. I'll catch them for you." Well, I put them into the conditions that I thought that they would want, and they did fantastically. I've got 3 no, I've got 2 colonies of the Judeochromis ornatus. I have a colony of Judeochromis malari, um, and I also now I'm building up a colony of albino Judeochromis transcriptus. And these are all Tanganyikan fish. They all are colony breeders. And I just think it's really cool to have all these different age classes in the same tank at the same time. And yeah, so I really enjoy them. They're not very common, but and I think they're sort of underlooked. I just picked up a new group of fish to put in that I think show off the Tropheus quite well, and that is a Neolamprologus lalupe. I bought them from a local breeder a few weeks ago, and he's had a lot of success. And lupe are like this very, very strong, bright orange. And
Hmm.
I think that that will really set off the black and blue of those Tropheus. And they're tough enough that the Tropheus don't seem to bother them. They have a completely different behavior. One of the things about this particular species that you're looking at right now, the Judeochromis, when the fry are small, they're very small, and they almost glue themselves to the rock. It's like they sort of, as they swim along. And the first time I knew I even had them, I thought, I just saw a little movement in this tank, and I thought, that must, those are fry. And they actually, their survival technique must be to hug rocks very, very closely. And because I have basically brine shrimp on the go all the time, I have microworms on the go all the time. So I have two different types of live food that I have on the go all the time. And then I also have one of the things that I've invested in is a small coffee grinder, and I take my high protein food and I put it into the little, coffee grinder, and I just pulverize it so it's a type of powder. So that's really good for all of the small fish. And so I've got a little bit of live food, and then my staple quite often is that, or sometimes I'll use a type of gel food as well that the fish can pick on when they're very young.
Cool. So I'm going to transition back to this video because these are my favorites. Um,
I think so.
so I want to wrap up with a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
The first is, if someone was interested in getting into cichlids, what species, maybe pair of species, what type of cichlids would you recommend starting out with?
Well, it would depend on whether they wanted to go on the hard water side or the soft water side. I think if they wanted to go on the soft water side, I think the ones that is your favorite, the crevenzas, they are great. They don't grow too big. You can have even a couple of pairs in a reasonable sized tank. They'll they'll do that. They don't seem to really bother the other fish too much. So I really like them for that reason.
Mhm.
There's another type of African river fish as well that I really like. You don't see them very much. They're called the butterfly cichlid. And that is another nice little fish as well. I've raised them before, and they don't grow too big. They're kind of subtle in terms of their coloration. So I think that they are really great fish. And you don't have to have a lot of them. You just have to give them the habitat and do good water quality. I think that's basically what it is. And if I was to take away one of the things that you and I learned, Alex, when we were in Amazonia, is that water is always flowing. It doesn't really get stale,
Okay.
so that's where, we're keeping these things in closed systems, right? I had the luxury of teaching and working at an environmental field school for young students. Well, I was raising, a quarter of a million to half a million salmon every year, taking the eggs, fertilizing the eggs. But that was a completely open filter system. The water came in from the creek, flew, flowed through our tanks, our incubation racks, and went back out into the stream again. So we were using the stream as a flow-through filter. Um, so I like those two fish in terms of starting. Um, I think angels are also another great fish to start off with. I mean, but if you want
Ooh.
to raise their fry, they're much more finicky because they have very, very small fry. If you want to go on the hard side of things and you want to have some African cichlids, the big thing about African cichlids is typically you have to have a large number of females to every male.
Mhm.
So quite often the females are not really strongly colored. So, however, you can get fish from Lake Malawi where the males and the females are both brightly colored. So if you want something that's showy, a very good species there would be Solosi, and I think it's Pseudotropheus solosi. They are a very pretty fish. The males are these bright, dark blue vertical lines with very, very showy. The females are bright yellow. Or something like red zebras. The males and females are both bright, bright red in color. And but the big thing with those fish is just to remember that I like to have 3 to 5 females for every male fish. That's the only thing. The males can be very species aggressive.
So Lakes Aquatics asks or mentions apistos as a potential great example of a beginner level cichlid. Have you kept pistogramma before?
I haven't, but other hobbyists have, and I think that they are also another really great fish. I'm not sure if they're as easy if the person wants to do some breeding. I think that they're a great fish. I've actually had them in my and we saw them in Amazonia,
Hmm.
Apistos with Tetras, and they get along extremely well. I have some really nice photographs that I took of Apistos that I kept in that big tank at one time. I'm not sure whether I kept them actually as good as I could have. We have a couple of people in my area that are specialists in Apistos. So if I was going to get to Apistos, and I mean that this would be my recommendation for anybody. If you can find somebody who's really successful in your area, obviously they know your water systems and things like that. That's a fantastic way to go,
Yeah.
because then I mean, I don't think I would be in this hobby unless I had these two fellows in my neighborhood as a kid that I could go down and look at what they were doing in their fish rooms and ask them the questions that I was at that particular time.
Have you ever kept shell dwellers? Blake asks thoughts on Maltese for beginners.
Maltese, there's another example. That's another great African fish to keep. Absolutely. I have friends of mine that do keep them. Um, I've been trying to play around. Would it be possible to have a multi-colony, for example, in with maybe something like these fish here with the Burchardi? Would that be possible? The problem that I have is that my Tanganyikan tanks, I can't where I would like to put, these different shell dwellers in. Shell dwellers require an omnivorous diet. If
Hmm.
I put anything of higher protein than, just the little bit of protein that's in the typical kind of vegetarian food, my Tropheus will get bloat very
Oh,
easily,
interesting.
very quickly. So I have to be able to put fish in there that can survive on a lower protein diet. And one of those fish that I have found that can do that are the Neolamprologus lalupe. I have a beautiful male lalupe that was causing havoc in a friend's tank, and he said, "Do you want him?" And I said, "Well, I'll put him in with the Tropheus and see how he does." And he has done extremely well now for the last 4 years with a colony of Tropheus. In fact, one of the funny things that I get to watch from time to time, he likes to dig, and the male Tropheus likes to dig, and they move sand from one guy's side of the tank to the other guy's side of the tank.
Yeah. I mean, they can't both have nice little nesting areas,
That's
right?
right. That's right. Absolutely.
Um, so the last thing I want to touch on is if you could give a couple of pieces of advice for people that want to keep cichlids, you know, just what are the three-ish things that come to mind that are things to help make sure that you have success?
Figure out what the water is from the area that they're from and try to duplicate that as much as possible and keep it as stable as possible. I think that would be number one. Number two, I think, and goes right across the board, staying up with those water changes. Uh, I think because we're in this period of time that we're staying at home more and not going out and about. I think that that's one of the reasons why I got 10 species spawning at the same time. I've kept multiple species all of my career in the hobby. This is the first time I had 10 species spawning at the same time. What's the common ingredient? Well, I'm paying more attention to them. You know,
Yeah, you
and
got nothing else going on.
yeah, well, and they're fascinating. I mean, I go into the fish room and I don't even know what I might find, kind of thing. And that's to me, that's part of the joy of this particular hobby, because they are living in their own worlds, and never know exactly what you might find. You have to pay attention. You might see a fish like the Victorian Cichlid that I mentioned earlier that you don't think is well, but she's totally fine. It's just that she's got 30 babies in her mouth, kind of thing.
Right.
And so that would be the second thing. And then the third thing is pay very close attention, I think, on your filtration, because your filtration is taking is what you're compensating for because you're not have a flow through system. So
Right.
those would be the things, and you know, I think you can have far less filtration than I use and have great results. I've seen it, but if I forget a water change, or if I'm in Amazonia for 2.5 weeks, as long as I've done a good solid water change before I've gone, because I have all these multiple systems that are running simultaneously, then I had like zero issues. In fact, this species that you have on the screen right now um, spawned while I was away. It's the first time that's ever happened for me.
The key is for you to just not be there.
Absolutely. And
Um,
let your partner do the work.
right. So on that note, I'm going to start to wrap this up. I want to thank you so much for joining us. If people are interested in following along in your fish room, I know that you post for your local club, but where can they find you?
If they want to, if they want to look for me, I mean, I make my Vimeo videos free and things like that. I mean, if people are really interested, I mean, I don't have any problem with. I like teaching and I like helping people because I've been helped so much by different people. So, I don't have a channel like you.
I know.
Yeah.
But you can find, if you do a quick Google search for Vic's Fish Room, you will find links to his Vimeo page, and I'll put a link in the description once this video goes live, or once it stops being a live stream and starts being just a normal video, so that people can find and follow along with what he's updating.
Yeah.
I must continue the stream forever. We can't continue the stream forever.
No, that's fine. You can always call me. This is now that we got the technology sort of worked out.
Exactly, we can kind of do this. So for everyone at home, I'm going to continue doing these. I'm going to be doing Aquariums with Strangers every Thursday from here for the foreseeable future, because we are kind of stuck in quarantine. So this is a nice way to catch up with people that I know, or people that I'd like to know better. So I want to thank Vic for joining us. Victor, thanks so much. And with that, I hope you all have a lovely evening, and thank you all for spending time with us. Bye.
Yes. Stay safe, everyone.